Knowledge Stack podcast. My name's Jason. Thank you for joining me. Today's conversation is one with Mark Wormgoor. Mark is a tech strategist and executive coach. Mark and I had a conversation about artificial intelligence. We spent a good deal of time talking about the organizational dynamics related to AI, conversations you may be having or questions you may be getting from board members, from the rest of the executive team about AI and where it sort of fits within the organization. We talked a bit about compliance. Mark is from the Netherlands, so he is subject to quite a bit more regulation than we are lucky to be burdened with here in the US. We talked a bit about third parties and some methods by which an organization might deploy AI. Certainly not every organization is lucky enough to have unlimited resources and can deploy a, $100,000, $200, $500 million cluster of compute resources in order to have an on-prem, secure, fully protected artificial intelligence inferencing or learning system within their walls. But there are certainly ways to deploy AI in a secure and regulatory compliant way. So there was a really good conversation about that. If there's any questions about any of the topics that we discussed, there'll be some more information in the show notes, including information on how to get in touch with Mark if you have additional questions or would like to reach out to him. As always, thank you for listening or watching. I appreciate your viewer and listenership. I would appreciate it if you subscribed, whether you use Spotify, Apple, Amazon, Good Pods, whatever app you happen to be using. Subscribing to the podcast lets me know that I'm going down the right path and I should continue on with more and more content. Frankly, I'm going to do it anyway because I like talking to a Black background and nobody, but I have issues and I'm okay with that. So please enjoy this conversation with Mark Wormgoor. Have a great day, and I look forward to sharing more content with you in the near future. Take care. Bye-bye. We're here with Mark Wormgoor. Mark is how would you describe yourself, Mark? Give me your bio instead of me trying to translate your information. Let's get it right from the source.
Cool. My bio, tech strategist, executive coach, 30 years in tech, and I've done everything. I've started all the way at the bottom in infrastructure consulting. I've had high leadership roles in technology, and these days I have my own company, Tairi, where we do tech strategy, advisory work. We do a lot of coaching, and I also do software development. I have a team of developers in the Philippines, and we do software development for all sorts of businesses.
And where are you headquartered, Mark?
Headquartered in Amsterdam, the Netherlands, Europe.
Right. I'm going international. This is my second international podcast recording, so I'm happy to spread the reach of the Knowledge Stack across the Atlantic. So cool. Thank you for joining me. Mark and we're going to have a conversation about AI and technology in general, but we're going to focus a little bit on AI. Let's talk about getting started with AI. I'm in technology. You're in technology. We report up through a chain, or we are part of a organizational structure that has varying levels of knowledge about technology in general. How would you approach a boardroom, a leadership committee, an executive committee, an IT steering committee? How would you approach non-technologists with the idea that AI can be transformative to an organization? How do you start that conversation?
So I'm wondering if that still happens, because what I hear, and I go to a lot of events with CIOs, what I hear is that a lot of boards are pushing CIOs to do more with AI. They read this, they read the papers, they listen to all the news networks. They know that everybody has to do something with AI. So actually what I hear is that most boards are pushing CIOs to just do AI. Whatever that means, they don't fully understand, or how that could work for their business. They also don't really understand. But they're just saying, get on with it. I think everybody these days, and I read a report, and I think this was half a year ago, I read a report about the different generations and the types of people that use AI, and then simple AI like ChatGPT. And there isn't even that big a difference between the Gen Z, the young generation, and even the boomers and everything in between. the use of AI is there in almost every generation. So I think telling boards or having to explain to boards that they have to use AI, I think that's something of the past. I think it's actually the other way around. The struggle that I do hear from a lot of CIOs is the opposite. Like, I get this push to use AI, I just don't know where to start, or don't know what to do, or don't know how to please them. And I think that is a challenge that I see a lot in my work. And my what I preach wherever I go is AI. AI is a cool tool, but I think we as technologists, we tend to suffer from shiny object syndrome. It's a cool tool, so let's get and deploy it. We don't know what it's going to do. We don't really know where it's going to help us, but we love AI. It's cool. Everybody says to use it, so let's go and deploy that. And that's really what I'm fighting against. I'm saying, as a CIO, if you're asked to deploy AI, I think the first step is really to go to all your business counterparts. AI on itself is just a tool, right? And it's really cool and it can do amazing things, but it is nothing more than a tool. So it is there in our businesses to solve business problems. So first step, I say, is go to director of sales, director of marketing, director of compliance, head of supply chain, a COO, and ask them what are the biggest challenges that you have. What is preventing you from making the company grow more? What is preventing you from us being compliant? What is preventing you from lowering costs? And is there a way that we can deploy AI as a tool to solve those really big problems for you? And that's the approach that I believe in. Try to solve business problems and not the other way around.
So how do you temper that? So you make a great point. It's not uncommon for ideas to come from the boardroom. Some of them a little outside of the realm of let's just call it reality. How do you temper the enthusiasm of board members or other executives or even rank and file employees of an
Mm-hmm.
organization? How do you temper that excitement and that interest in something like AI and turn it into actionable strategy um, in the boardroom and in those environments? I 100% agree with your approach. Is you have to go to the business units and kind of take their temperature and find out what their potential use cases are for really any technology. But how do you temper that excitement in the boardroom so that you get the support of the board and most importantly the money and the
Exactly.
resources required to implement, but also at the same time set some level of expectation that within 30 minutes after the board meeting you're not going to have a fully automated agentic AI model that's going out and solving all of your organizational problems. How would you approach that situation?
So I agree with what you said, right? I'm not a big fan of tampering either, because if they want something, the good thing is that that's also the access to money and budget. So which in technology, it's often hard to get money and budget for the things that we want to do and probably should be doing. So I don't want to temper it too much. I do think it is an opportunity to come up with a realistic plan. So I do believe, and these are people, I believe in the approach of give me a month, give me 3 months. I will go and do my rounds around the business. I will go to each and every board member or maybe their direct reports, and I will look at what are the opportunities that we have in this company to actually go and deploy AI. Then, with all of them, if we have those opportunities, we'll do small pilots. We'll see if it works. And if it works, we can go and deploy an AI solution. But that is the approach that I believe in. And I think it's okay if you ask a board for time, for a month or 3 months. I mean, you can't ask for 2 years. Of course,
Sure.
with AI, that's not going to happen, because in 2 years, nobody knows what's going to happen. There's nothing wrong with asking for a month or 3 months. But you do have to go and actually attack this one head on, because you
Mhm.
can't say, as a CIO, I'm going to focus on my operational issues, I'm going to focus on my technology debt, I'm going to focus on security or whatever else, and I'm going to ignore this board question. I mean, this question is front and center for the board, and maybe even the advisory committee that they report to. So you have to give them a good answer. You have to dedicate time and some of your team's time to get this done and to give them an answer and to see what you can actually do. I mean, AI is incredible and it can do so much if you approach it correctly.
So you had mentioned you're going to reach out to the business units and talk about potential use cases. And then I heard you say pilot. Is that the approach that you tend to take with these sorts of things? And
kind of nibble off smaller proof of concept or pilot opportunities to, at the very least, just demonstrate the execution on the use case presented by the business units. Do you find that's the most effective approach at getting more broad organizational buy-in for those sorts of projects that usually are much larger in scope?
Yeah, I do, for a couple of different reasons. I mean, you don't want to go in a $1 million, $2 million, $3 million program if you don't know there's going to be an ROI at the end. So first, you can do a pilot often at a low budget, 5K, 10K, 20K, I don't know, but you can do a pilot relatively easy and relatively quickly. So it helps with two things. First, it helps that you need to define the actual problem. So on the business side, in the business unit, you need to define the actual problem that you're trying to solve. And from the technology side, you need to prove that the solution that you have actually works against that problem. It can be a small iterative process. You may not get it right the first time, but with a small spend, relatively small spend, you can prove that it is actually going to work. And you can hopefully, and I think that's the intent, measure the results in EBIT, in revenue, in compliance, and something else. But in my world, it should have a measurable result. I see too many deployments, and I do see all these deployments of a Copilot or a ChatGPT, and those aren't cheap tools. I mean, they cost $20, $30 per user per month. If you add that for a 1,000 user company, for example, it adds up really quickly. I see a lot of companies that just take the plunge, go and deploy Copilot to all of their users, and at the end of the year, they see no return on investment at all. And I think that's exactly the approach that you don't want to take with AI.
Especially if you're simply deploying it as, just a basic inferencing chat model.
Totally.
$20 a month is an awful lot of money to spend to ask it questions like, hey, does this paragraph look good for the performance review I'm about to do?
Yeah.
That does not seem like a very good return on investment. Now, having said that, where do you think, specifically in AI, where do you think is kind of the best value proposition? Obviously, this is going to change industry to industry and job function and even silo to silo. But where do you see the usage of AI within an organization generally as the most effective deployment that's going to get the best return on investment?
Yeah. I think at this point, it's best at what I call repetitive knowledge work. So it is knowledge work. It's white collar work. For example, drafting simple paragraphs or transcribing meetings, but it's simple work that doesn't require a lot of human intelligence, but is also repetitive, something that happens quite a bit. Reviewing a contract. I mean, I love it for contracts, for example. We have sometimes in IT these really big contracts, and I love that instead of using search in a contract, I can just talk to the contract. I can just ask questions and say, on what page is this actually described? So I think contract work, and of course, you always need a lawyer. We've all seen the cases where actual lawyers have taken fake cases, hallucinated cases to court, so don't do that. But it really helps with those simple knowledge cases. I mean, also there's a lot done in compliance as well. In money laundering, there's a lot there. So I think a lot of those simple cases. I also hear a lot of people say it doesn't work in blue collar work. And I've seen a couple of examples. I'll give you two examples from a client that I worked with recently, where it's the opposite. So they have deployed this in factories. They actually did two different things. So one, they had a production line, and at the end of the line, they had a person inspecting the product. So was the product correct? Did nothing go wrong in the production? And they replaced that person with a camera, with a machine learning / AI model at the end. And basically, their quality went up by so much. Their quality output went from 90 to 98, 99%, because the review of the product at the end of the production line was fully automated. Basically, every time that a faulty product came out of the line, it just got booted off the line and they went on. So that's one example. And the other one, and I love this as well, what they did is they have all these machines in factories, and they're really complex machines, and they have manuals to go with that are hundreds of pages long. They did what I just said for contracts. They did with their manuals. They actually put all the manuals for all the machines into a simple model. And the engineers could actually ask the model for, I need to do this maintenance on this machine. Can you show me what I need to do? And instead of the engineer having to go through a PDF or a book of 400 pages, it would just immediately show the right page on screen and tell them what to do. So very simple blue collar solutions that made a lot of difference in this factory.
Those are great examples. So in my industry, a highly regulated industry with a lot of sensitive information, medical, financial, all of those sorts of walled gardens, if you will. How do you navigate the usage of any AI technology with any of these models and ensure compliance with things like GDPR, HIPAA for medical records? How would you address that specifically in the boardroom and push back against we have to use AI, we have to use AI? How would you approach that scenario where, again, you have to kind of temper the reality that you can't just send all of your data to ChatGPT or, God forbid, DeepSeek, and address those realities in the boardroom with the realities of the regulators and ensuring the privacy of your customer member information?
Yeah, so I think there's two parts to this. So first, I don't think, and in Europe we have the EU AI Act, which is coming into effect very soon. And basically it says you can't take risky decisions that affect a person fully automated. And I think that makes a lot of sense. So the same applies to the financial industry or to the government or to medical services. I mean, I love how AI, for example, can scan images and see if there's cancer in the image, right? I love that. But at the end, it goes to an oncologist, for example, and they actually review the image and say, is this right or wrong? And I think that's the approach that we still need to take with a lot of this. If it really starts to affect, the model starts to affect a human, whether that's money laundering or it's medical research or something else, the last step, the final decision, it always needs to be a human that makes a decision. So I think that's the first step that we need to work with. And the second step is really indeed compliance and data privacy. And you just can't send a lot of your data into ChatGPT and just see what it does. I'll give you an example of a Dutch company that does this, and I loved how they solved it. Basically, this is a company that is working on transcribing doctor-patient conversations in Dutch to put in a medical file. And of course, they can't use the open models. They can't go to an 11 Labs or they can't go to a ChatGPT Whisper because they would be sending medical data over the internet to a US-based company. Instead, what they did, they actually bought their own NVIDIA cluster. They installed it in a local data center here, and they are running the transcriptions using their own custom model. And they've probably built that off one of the large number of models that is out there. But they're actually using their own model. They're running it locally on their own server, and they're doing it that way so that they're completely compliant. The data stays within their own rented data center space, and it never goes to a third-party company. So I think that's a great way. If you're in an extremely compliant environment, like in the medical space, you can still use AI. You can still do it, but maybe ChatGPT or Claude isn't the answer then.
So it's interesting. I on your LinkedIn, on your website, in your bio, you're certainly critical of pushing certain infrastructure, certain resources to third parties blindly. I 100% agree with that. I'm curious so I have two questions. First, let me back up. You mentioned the AI regulations that are starting to make their way through the EU. I'm curious about, in my industry, we've had automated decisioning, automated underwriting on loans for decades. If I go to a website, I want an instant decision on a loan. I'm curious if those sorts of decisions are going to get inadvertently tied up in some of these new regulations, because in a lot of cases, those have no human intervention. The decision is made, funds are transferred instantly. So I wonder if we're going to have certain situations where people either challenge their denials and use some of these regulations that were really targeted more towards AI and large models making more complex decisions. These are fairly basic, non-large language models. They're small models. They're based on basic criteria. I'm curious if there's carve-outs in the regulation for that. I'm not really super familiar. Thankfully, it's on the other side of the pond for us, and we don't have to worry about it right now. But do you have any insight into that?
I think it's a really good question. So I think in the first set, or at least as for what I know about the industry, a lot of this, right, insurance calculations or loan underwriting isn't actually, it's not often not machine learning, but
Right.
often it's just algorithms, right? So an algorithm that was coded by humans. So there is no intelligence itself in the algorithm, and I think those algorithms aren't considered at all, right? So I think that that's easy. When it comes to AI or even machine learning, it already starts to get a lot more complex because, yeah, what can you do? What do you actually know about the person? So, for example, if you start to combine the place that somebody lives or their age, or it's very easy to get discriminatory or to exclude certain people or certain groups or certain neighborhoods from the models just because of where they live or their gender or their ethnicity or something else in these applications. And I think that's exactly what the regulations are trying to prevent. I don't think they have any issue with an algorithm. I think the issue is that it could have a big impact on certain people in certain groups.
Agreed. And, I, in my industry, I talk to a lot of, chief lending officers, and a lot of them are skeptical about the implications related to using AI to make loan decisions because, as you mentioned, the models are great at detecting patterns, and unfortunately, there are some segments, there are some groups that may have a higher propensity for delinquency or just generally different behavior, and a model that just identifies that, and you need to take a lot of other pieces of information into account when making those decisions. So it can be really easy for someone to look at what a model does and say that it's either hallucinating or it's making decisions that might not be ethical or may be slanted in one way or the other. So it's an interesting challenge. You're getting data and you're making decisions based on data, and the model isn't making character judgments or anything like that. But when you have certain regions, areas, neighborhoods, that fall into a certain category, lower income and things like that, the model is going to make some decisions based on that data, and a human may not. So
Yeah.
that's an interesting point. It's a tightrope, and it's a difficult line to walk. You want to make data-driven decisions, and you want to make decisions based on data, and the challenge is sometimes you don't do that, and and that's part of equity and things like that. So it's hard to remove the ones and zeros from the equation and still get an effective model. So I think that's going to be a challenge for a long time.
And I think what you see is that the problem with AI models is they give a black or white decision. And I know that under the hood, that's not true, because what ML models do is they give you a percentage of, right, that something is good or bad, but people take that as a black or white decision. I'll give you an example, and this is from last year, but last year I was trying to generate a CTO image. Now, in your world, in my world, CTOs, CIOs are mostly men. And I don't know if that's 70 or 80 or 90%, but the other 10, 20, 30 is female. And that's, I mean, and that's amazing. But if you ask a model then to go and generate an image of a CTO or a CIO, you're not going to get 7 images that are male and then 3 images that are female. That's not how it works. You're going to get 10 images that are male, because basically the majority of CIOs, CTOs is male. Therefore, if I need to generate an image of a CTO, CIO, it's always going to be male. So it doesn't take into account those percentages. And I think that's really where the models go wrong sometimes in making decisions.
Absolutely. So let's go back to the privacy issue. So third parties, the example that you gave is great. They grabbed an NVIDIA cluster, deployed it at a local data center, and they're good to go. If I don't have several six figures to invest in a DGX cluster and things like that, um, you know, myself, I have a model running here at home, on consumer grade hardware, and it's great. It's perfect for my use case. I'm trying to divorce myself of Alexa and Siri, and it's fun to mess with. But at my organization, we're kind of taking the similar approach. We don't have, and back to your earlier point about proof of concept and pilot programs and things like that. It's really easy to, deploy a 5090 and use that, if you can get one, to do some basic inferencing, to do some basic training, to do some RAG and stuff like that. It's, you can certainly demonstrate a use case, certainly for a few hundred users doing basic inferencing. That's super easy. So let's say we get to the next level and we want to start to expose this to our customers. Now we go from several hundred to several tens of thousands. Potentially, if it's out on the web, potentially it's used by a lot more people. So in that situation, you either have to decide to make the investment and deploy a cluster in a data center that's got the ability to support that, because you certainly don't want to deploy a non-performant solution. You don't want 1 token per second. You don't want people waiting 15 minutes for a response to a very basic mundane question. So in that situation, certainly you could make the investment and deploy it at a data center. What are your thoughts on partnering with some of these vendors that do provide on-demand compute resources and GPU resources to support that? How do you feel from a compliance perspective at trusting those third parties that they're going to do what we need them to do to ensure that our member data is safe and adequately protected, certainly compliant with GDPR and all of the other regulations that are either forthcoming or going to come in the near future?
So if I take that to AI, I don't see a big difference between AI data on the one hand, or customer data or email data or something else on the other hand. I mean, company data is company confidential data. So I think the measures that you apply to AI aren't really that different from any of the other measures that you would take for a non-AI, a standard application. So if you take that to GDPR, a lot of governments in Europe and a lot of businesses in Europe store a lot of their information with a Google, and there's some issues with Google and privacy, or with a Microsoft, or with an Amazon. And those are big companies, and they have, first of all, they have the contract models that actually work with that. They have the SOC compliance in place. They have the ISO 27001 compliance in place. These are big companies that put a lot of compliance in place for big companies. So I think it makes sense to check the contract and to check the compliance, just like we have always done in IT with these companies as well. So I think these big companies aren't all that big a risk. I think where it gets risky is you have all these smaller, cool AI startups as well. I don't know how much thought they've given or how much knowledge they have of something like SOC 2, of ISO 27001, or any of the other compliance measures that they probably should be taking. So as a big company, I really want to be careful with my data. So I would pick one of the larger companies and make sure that the contract's in place, that all of the compliance checks are in place. And after that, there's nothing wrong with using these big players for confidential data, even customer data, as long as all the controls are in place.
So given the situation where you had to choose, in your mind, it's a much, from a compliance and regulatory perspective, it's a safer path to chart choosing Copilot. If you're already in the Azure environment, you're already in that environment, you have the DLP rules enforced, you've got everything segmented and contained within that environment. Going the Copilot route makes more sense than engaging with a company like RunPod or something like that is maybe a little less startup-y, but still probably not SOC 2, probably not ISO 27001, but you're not going to get the same level of granularity. I can't run my own model. I'm not just purchasing GPU resources. I'm actually purchasing a service, and I'm using Copilot, and I'm using their model. I think there's limited ability to do training and things like that, but that's the lesser of the two evils, and you just have to accept that there's certain limitations on what you're going to be able to do in that environment.
And even if you look at Microsoft for Copilot, they have all these standard contractual clauses in place, and I think they released that a long time ago, that they're not going to use any of the data that you put in for training. So whatever else you have in the standard contract, they do the exact same for AI. So if you deploy Copilot, and they have, of course, the Copilot for Office and the Copilot for the standard Copilot, even if you use the standard Copilot with your Office 365 accounts, none of the data is going to be used for training. All the contractual clauses apply, and they really take care of the data. And of course, Microsoft also through Azure, they expose a lot of other services. They have Copilot Studio, which is a first step that you can take. But even with Azure and development, they even expose a lot of the OpenAI APIs through Azure, and they've made sure that all of the security is in place for all of that data as well. So I think if you have a Microsoft enterprise agreement anyway, it is one of the safer ways to, and you can do a lot of AI with Copilot Studio or Azure. So it's a really safe way to make sure you're not exposing the data to any other third parties.
You mentioned when we were talking about Azure, you mentioned ChatGPT in there, and that sort of incestuous relationship, that 49% ownership of the nonprofit arm of OpenAI. Do you have concerns about that relationship and how they're sort of Microsoft essentially is a de facto owner, granted a very, 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 very close to majority owner of OpenAI, and we're starting to see some pushback in the business world about what those organizations are doing to train some of this data, and a lot of the content creators, most recently news outlets and things like that, challenging the use of that data to train. Do you think that relationship with Microsoft and OpenAI is problematic, or is that just the way that it is now in tech?
Well, so first, I think that the training of using anything for training is probably something unethical. Or at least in my perspective, it is unethical, but it is what got us AI. So without having used all of the books that are out there, all of the texts that are out there on the internet, all of the news articles, we wouldn't have a ChatGPT, we wouldn't have had a Claude. So there's a very negative side to that for all the people that have written books and that have written all those news articles. So I don't condone it, but we are where we are right now.
Well, the interesting part about that is it's a you can make an argument that it's a feature and not a bug. It's if you want your content out in the world, in the the digital ecosystem, at some point, where do you draw the line between exploitation of that content and advertising of that content? It's hard to make that argument that I agree, profiting, and that's what OpenAI, that's what Claude, that's what everybody is doing, because I pay subscriptions to OpenAI. I don't pay it to John Q. author who wrote a book that's 200 pages that has sold 15 copies on Amazon but has been consumed entirely by 45 different large language models. So I 100% agree on paper that there's got to be some way to balance the rights of content creators with, at the same time, providing that information out to the greater public so that they get some sort of at least some sort of citation for that work.
Yeah.
And I don't know how you necessarily do that. I do see some of the models are definitely getting better with citing the information and the sources. I think Claude does a great job at that. When I'm picking models, Claude is kind of my go-to. I like their approach, certainly on paper, certainly in their 10K, certainly in their corporate communications. They are the soft, kinder, gentler model out there, and are respective of content creators, and at least are citing that. But it's a challenge, and I'm not sure how we resolve that. There's no global tagging of information across the domain of human knowledge. So how do you cite every piece of information with the ultimate source of that information? I don't know if there's a way to do that.
No.
We're doomed. The content creators just have to accept the fact that their content is going to be trolled.
I don't have an answer to that one. I think this is going to be lawsuits for years to come and years to come. Disney just filed this week, and against Midjourney, and I don't see that stopping anytime soon. Those court cases. So I don't have that answer. It's above my pay grade.
Yeah. So again, in the tightly regulated space, obviously we talked about Copilot, and there's no shortage of larger data center clients or data center providers that can offer compute resources to help you deploy a pilot or proof of concept, and make it more of a consumptive model. As somebody who is a longtime employee of multiple credit unions, I've been in the credit union industry for 30 years, and for those listeners that may not be familiar, credit union is a cooperative environment. It's a bank, but in a cooperative nature. They're nonprofits. They are usually very community focused. There are different levels of credit union community participations. There are some that focus on low income areas and they have a low income designation. There are what are called CDFIs, which are community designated financial institutions, and their mission is, and credit unions are, we describe the movement as a mission to serve our members. So we're banks, we provide banking services, but we do it in sort of a compassionate way and a way that helps the greater good. So my banking partners will argue that we're no different than any other bank, and that there's a constant back and forth there. But so my contention is the cooperative nature of credit unions is conducive to sort of partnerships, and credit unions have what are called QSOs. They're credit union service organizations. They're basically for-profit businesses that are created to serve credit unions, and it's a requirement that they serve credit unions. So I think a feature of credit unions is that cooperative nature. So with the complexity of deploying models in a safe way to protect member data, my thoughts are the cooperative nature of credit unions is a feature that could potentially be leveraged to provide scalability and data center services. 40 credit unions getting together and purchasing a cluster makes much more sense in terms of the return on that investment if you can spread it out over 40 credit unions. And those scale pretty well, and credit unions, certainly smaller ones, are not going to have the demand and can probably get away with smaller clusters that will be performant enough to do basic inferencing, where we still need to keep, we're all still separate, we need to keep our individual data private, but doing that kind of puts another firewall in between the greater data center clients, the Microsofts of the world. It kind of puts it behind an additional firewall. So I'm seeing that out in the marketplace for companies like RunPod, and there's no shortage of vendors that provide data center services, specifically also GPU resources and things like that. But I think that's a great use case for taking that cooperative mission and that cooperative environment and using it for technology purposes. I'm curious if that's the type of thing that you see in other industries, certainly over in Europe and the EU. Are there sort of cooperatives like that do cluster together and try to deploy technology resources in that way, or is this a unique situation that really doesn't have an analog?
And I'm thinking about this. So I haven't, if I look at the for-profit space, I haven't really seen a lot of it. I mean, they all go to their own suppliers and they deal with their own suppliers locally. In the non-profit space, the government space, it actually happens a lot. So we have a lot of communities, for example, or municipalities that actually do a lot of their administration together. So instead of one, you'll see 4, 5, 6 that are doing their taxes and a lot of the IT work for their taxes together, so they don't have to do it all on their own. And I think that makes a lot of sense because it's not for profit. It's very cooperative. They do this for the local citizens, and it has to be cost effective. So I do think in those kind of spaces, it makes a lot of sense. I haven't seen them do that in the AI space, but I don't think our municipalities are that far advanced as the credit unions. So I haven't seen that one yet.
What do you, thinking about the large providers, your Amazons, your Azure, your Google, which of the providers do you think is best positioned to take on those services from, small to mid-range SMBs at this point?
I think what you're going to see is that most It depends. So I think a lot of these standard AI services, let me call it that, people are going to go with the provider that they already have. So Google is really pushing Gemini, and Microsoft is really pushing Copilot. So I would say if you're a Microsoft shop, it's very likely that they're going to go with Copilot, Azure, whatever. If you're a Google shop, I think it's they're mostly going to go with Gemini and all the services that Google has to offer. So I think that already takes away a lot of the potential customers for everything else. All the other solutions are really more niche services. So if you have a very specific sales solution, or a very specific factory solution, or a very specific anti-money laundering solution, or something else, then I think there's still room to find customers. But I think a lot of the SMBs will go to the standard providers that they know and that they're already dealing with. And of course, you're seeing that, and I don't know how well that's going to go. A lot of software providers, like a Salesforce, like a ServiceNow, like an SAP, they're all pushing their own AI solutions on top of the software that they already had. So they're also taking a big part of the market. I think that's the way that the market is going to get divided. You'll have a couple of really cool niche players, and of course the ones that were earliest to market, like Anthropic and OpenAI. They have taken a big piece of the market share. There's Google, Microsoft, Amazon, and then there's a lot of the standard software providers that are adding AI on top, and you'll see some new niche providers that are going to win a small piece of the market. I don't see or haven't really seen any small ones that are really taking big pieces of the market, and I think that's going to be really hard.
So do you think, I mean, I would agree. I think Microsoft and Google are probably 1 and 2, and they probably flip-flop in that, in that ranking of, I think there's probably more people using Azure. Certainly larger organizations are using Azure probably more than they're using Google. So Google's probably, probably got more market share in the SMB space, and Copilot's probably bigger on the higher end. I'm curious what you think about Amazon and Apple. Could they potentially be some sort of sleeping giants? And Amazon is always looking for the next thing. They've got such a large compute resources in their AWS cloud, and I think their approach is a little bit different. They're not really offering a sort of packaged product. I don't think they're more offering the resources for you to kind of BYO model, and Apple has kind of been a little bit of a laggard. I know they're communicating a lot more recently at WWDC about some Apple Intelligence. I mean, the branding there is designed for Apple. I mean, AI, how is that not Apple Intelligence? How is everyone not referring to AI as Apple Intelligence now? They need to take a page out of the Xerox book and just turn that into Apple Intelligence. But I feel like they're just the way that they go to market with everything. Between them and Amazon, I feel like they're sleeping giants just waiting to wake up, and somebody just instantly realizes that, oh my God, this could be transformative. What are your thoughts about those two?
So I think, Amazon it's basically the compute resources that a lot of businesses use, and a lot of small, medium, SaaS businesses use, of course, to develop their software. So when all of them, they want to go and implement AI on top of their application or integrate AI into their application, their go-to is Amazon. Mm-hmm. And I don't think that that's going to change. So you'll see Amazon, and the way that Amazon is doing this is they're providing the stack, and AI is a part of that stack, and they're going to be successful for that specific market. And of course, that's not the consumer market, and that's not the end user corporate market like you and I, but for businesses that are building software, developing software for customers like SaaS, I think they're going to do really well. So that's Amazon. They have a very specific part of the market. I think Apple, on the one hand, it's disappointing. And that's mostly because in 23, they really overpromised and underdelivered in 24. And it's now 25, and they still have to deliver on a lot of those promises. I think it's quite sad, because honestly, Siri, if I talk to ChatGPT, it's so much better than if I have a discussion with Siri, which is, not great, to say the least. I do like what Apple is doing, in that I do believe as Apple deploys something, it's going to be incredible, and it's going to be useful, and it's going to integrate every part of the phone or the applications or the email or everything else. It's just, I think they've really underestimated how hard AI is and the expertise that you need for that and how deeply it needs to integrate into their iOS. So I hope, and this is more hope than knowledge, I hope that next year they're going to come out with something, and they just said it's going to be somewhere in 26, that they're going to deploy an Apple Intelligence, which is going to be absolutely incredible. I mean, I would love to just talk to my phone and have those discussions through Siri instead of having to type and swipe all the time. But if and when that's going to happen, yeah, I think we need to see. I think they've underestimated how hard this is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's I agree with you on certainly your take on Amazon. I think they're the utilitarian, they're the infrastructure, they're the ones that are allowing you to bring whatever model you want. We're going to run it on one of our Elastic Cloud instances, and you enjoy. You can train it, you can do whatever you want. There's no guardrails up. It's a free for all, and it's definitely a different approach than Microsoft and Google are taking with packaged products meant more for end users, to just consume. They're going after the consumptive model. Amazon is going after here are the tools, go ahead and build. But yeah, I'm with you on Apple at that kind of. I think this is the second time that Apple has missed an opportunity. I think the first time was and this is an area where the EU and basically everybody except for the United States was fully on board with tokenization and with EMV and the usage of that technology. If Apple would have had NFC and tap to pay early on, I think we would have seen. I would no longer be carrying plastic. It would be on the phone. It would be ubiquitous, and we're getting there, but the amount of time it took for Apple to even just acknowledge that was a direction to move was baffling to me. And I feel the same way about where they're at with AI. They're kind of dragging their feet and missed a great opportunity to get in early. So we'll see how that goes. What's your perspective on that? Coming from an environment that you guys have had tap to pay, you guys got rid of mag stripes decades ago. We're just now getting to the point where we've got tap to pay, and we're trying to, teach our 85-year-old grandparents how to, tap instead of swipe. And, we, up until, I don't know, 10 years ago, we still had the paper machines where, the cards were embossed and you'd run the thing over and it would put an indentation with carbon paper. We were that far behind with the EMV thing. What's your perspective on that? Just out of curiosity, somebody, that's been in that world for such a long time.
And I still don't understand this, right? Why, in so many regards, the US is so far behind on a lot of this payment stuff. For example, checks. I think the last time that I saw, a paper check was, I think, probably 20 years ago. Paper checks don't exist, right? We don't have any paper for payments. I mean, it's digital payments. Go through mobile banking, online banking, or you go through a card, and that's it. There is no other options to make a payment here. Mm-hmm. That's one. And then if I look at the speed of payments, if I make a payment here in Europe, it's minutes, right? A payment that I make, at least within the Netherlands, to most banks, but also to most banks across Europe, it takes a minute, 2 minutes. I make a payment from the app on my phone, and it arrives at the other bank in a minute, 2 minutes later, and that's it. Mm-hmm. Credit cards are not a thing here. So nobody has a credit card. It just doesn't exist. Credit cards are there for travel outside of the EU. Basically, people use debit cards for anything, and they go through the phone, through Apple Pay or Google Pay, or through a plastic card, but that's it. But it's all debit card. It's straight away. And also the fees for payments are so much lower. So, for example, if a store has to take a payment through debit, I think it costs them 10 cents or 15 cents. The same with an online payment. If a company wants to take an online payment, the fee for that is, I think at the moment, it's like 29 cents. So it does, and that basically has forced almost everything to go online because the payments are so cheap that a in-store payment, 15 cents, and an online payment, 30 cents, you can't do anything manual because it's always going to be more expensive.
This is an entirely... this is going to be another episode.
I know.
But we're going to stick with that for another 30 seconds. So my perception, you're 100% spot on with all of that. I don't understand. We have check scanners at every one of our teller stations because we get checks on a daily basis. We get hundreds of them. We have to route them. We have to, clear them, process them, put holds on them. Like it's maddening how outdated and legacy a lot of those things are. But I'm curious. My perception, as a crazy American, is that the rest of the world seems to be lagging a little bit behind on some of this stablecoin and crypto stuff. And that on the other side of the pond, I don't see a lot of the aggressiveness at trying to invent this new payment rail to support the faster settlement of payments. And I wonder if the reason for that is you guys figured it out a long time ago. You're using, a very fast, very low cost method to transact this business. So why spend the time, effort, money to invest in something that's still a little new, still a lot of regulatory gray areas, still a lot of, bad actors in the space. Do you think that's the reason why you see so much, from the Americans on crypto and stablecoins and, border payments and all of that sort of stuff, and SWIFT needs to go away because, we're going to start transacting in Bitcoin. Is it because you guys have already figured it out and you're just using your debit cards?
So I think first, everybody here is into crypto as well. So don't get us wrong, right? I mean, we have all the crypto traders. We have our own exchanges. I have my own cryptos as well, like everyone else. So crypto, as in the old crypto, is a big thing here, right? Like anywhere else, I'd say almost anywhere in the world. Using something like a stable coin for transactions. And I think that was the second part. I don't, because of all the payment infrastructure that we have already, I don't really see a big use for that here in Europe. And I know that the European Union is working on a CBDC here in Europe. It's probably going to take years, but I don't see how that would really go and completely upset the payment infrastructure that we have, because the payments are so quick, they're settled immediately. I mean, I send a payment somewhere, my money is also gone. There's no way to revert it. Not like a credit card that I have 30 days. I send €5 somewhere else and it's gone. It's out of my wallet, and there's no way for me to get it back other than talk to the other party and ask them to send it back. So, and that's between all banks in Europe. So I don't see how a stable coin isn't really going to help make that faster or more efficient. It's probably going to take longer if I see how long Bitcoin transactions sometimes take. So yeah, I think we have an existing very fast payment network in place.
Do you know what rails you're using for those transactions? Are they debit, ATM, messaging, or is it something else?
I think there's different ones. So within the Netherlands, for example, we have Equins, which does the payments in between all the banks. So it's like a payment processor in between all the banks. But I think a lot of them also do the point-to-point. And internationally, we have SWIFT for most of those transactions. And I think SWIFT has also gone, really fast. Even for me, I have my development team in the Philippines, and this is incredible. If I do my payments, I do my payments through Wise. What I do is I put all my payments in Wise like a batch. I pay the money from my bank account. That goes in. It should go instant, but I know the Wise interface, sometimes it takes a couple of minutes to show up there. It actually sends it out to the banks. And depending on which bank in the Philippines, some of the banks, it's only there next day. But a lot of the banks, it will actually be end-to-end transaction from my bank to Wise, to the network, to the Philippine bank, to their accounts. It's maybe 15 minutes. And that's incredible payment speed for international payments. These things used to take days, a week. And now it's like 10, 15 minutes before my money is actually in an account in the Philippines. And that's what I expect from banking these days.
Interesting. So, again, the European Union leading the way on payments and, banking transactions. We got to figure it out in the United States. We've got all these smart people in Silicon Valley. Somebody just figure out how to fix our payments. At the very least, I'll be happy to not have to process a check. Mark, I appreciate it. This was outstanding. We may end up talking again about payments and crypto and all of that sort of stuff. So, Again, thank you for your time. I appreciate it. You have a great day.
Okay, thanks. It was fun being here. Thanks, Jason.
The views and opinions expressed on this podcast are those of the host and guests and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of any organization, employer, or entity. The content provided is for informational and entertainment purposes only and should not be considered professional advice. Always seek the guidance of a qualified expert for any specific concerns. Thank you for listening to the Knowledge Stack Podcast.